in sports, in boxing, you see George Foreman get knocked out by Muhammad Ali. Nobody thought it was going to happen. He went into depression a couple of years. You saw Sugar Ray Leonard go against Roberto Duran, and he beat him psychologically and physically. He was in depression for a couple of years. You see it happening in sports where somebody goes to the finals or World Series or Super Bowl, and it's a very traumatic loss, public loss. Sometimes they don't get over it. What did the 2017 event do to you when your family was doing you guys call it the pyramid walk, I believe, with 8 of you? You can highlight what that means. And there was an accident, and where most people fell except for 3 of you, I believe, that didn't fall, and you were able to hold on. What did that do to you, and how were you able to recover from that single event that happened to your family?
Yeah, so we were training for about 6 weeks here in Florida in my backyard for that 8-person pyramid, and everything went pretty good. We were doing well. We started 2 feet, went up 10 feet, went up 15 feet, and then decided we were going to go up to the height to break that world record, which was for this 4-layer 8-person pyramid, 28 feet above the ground. And basically what it is 4 people standing on the wire, 2 people on their shoulders, and then a person on their shoulders, and then a person stacked on a 4th layer on top of that. So the top person, being my aunt, was about 50 feet above the ground at the apex of that pyramid. And as we made our way out in a rehearsal at full height, it was the second time we were doing it up at full height. The next day we were premiering it for Guinness and in front of a live audience. That was when my worst nightmare became a reality. We were walking our way out on the wire and not sure what happened, lost our balance. 5 of my family members and friends fell to the ground. And as you mentioned, I caught the wire, my cousin caught the wire, and 1 other gentleman stayed standing, but the other 5 hit the ground. Statistics say 30% chance of living from a fall of that height or greater without any safety devices. My sister not only fell, but she fell on her head. She broke every bone in her face. She has 73 screws and plates in her face alone at this point. Was in a coma, internal bleeding, a lot of broken bones. My aunt, a couple other guys hurt pretty bad. And I remember sitting in the hospital the day after that accident and in the waiting room, not knowing whether people were going to be able to walk anymore, not knowing whether my sister was going to live. We knew the other 4 were going to live, but they weren't out of the woods yet. And I remember sitting there and my dad looking at me and saying, "Hey, you're supposed to speak at Amalie Arena in Tampa to a corporation tomorrow." He said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Dad, I don't even know. I mean, it never walked the wire again." And it wasn't fear at that point in any way. It was the fact that I didn't want to disrespect those that had fallen. And I thought, how are they going to look at me? I certainly had survivor's guilt at that point. I felt horrible that I was in the hospital, that I couldn't trade places with any one of them. And my dad looked at me and he said, "Well, if you're going to do it, I'll be there for you." He said, "I'll make sure your rigging is safe and I'll make sure it goes off without a hitch. I've got your back." And I get goosebumps when I say that, because here his baby girl, his only daughter, may not live, but he supports his son to the point where, rather than being bitter, he says, "I'm there for you. I got your back." And I remember going, you know what? That, thinking back to my great grandfather, the legacy, him going back to the wire the day after that accident and saying, "You're right. This is what our family does." I said, "But I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to go visit the other 4 that are in the hospital and talk to the other two that stayed and caught the wire." Couldn't talk to my sister at that point, and get their blessing. And I did that. I made the rounds through the hospital and said, "What is your opinion?" And every one of them looked at me and said, "You have to do it. Get back on the wire." So I did. I got back on the wire the next day. I performed, in fact, for the next 5 weeks straight with only 4 days off. All the while, my sister's still in the hospital and in the process of recovering at that point. And after that 5 weeks, I took 6 weeks off. And then we headed to New York City, where I was headlining on a new show where we were going to perform the 7-person pyramid. So very similar to that pyramid. In fact, peripherally the same as that 8-person pyramid for me. So we started training and I started visualizing that pyramid falling in front of me on the wire. And after about a week of that, I started to physically tremble on the wire, something I'd never experienced in my life. In fact, the emotion of fear, I didn't even think existed in my DNA, certainly for walking the wire. And I remember going through that process. And after a week of that, going to my wife and saying, do you know what's going on in the pyramid? Are you watching this? And she goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, who's shaking?" And the reason I asked that is, as the leader of that pyramid for years, I've done it thousands of times. There's always somebody who has jitters early on. And when they shake, you feel them. You're all connected together. And she looked at me and she said, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Who's shaking?" She goes, "It's you." And I thought, there's no way. It can't be me. I was still denying the fact that I was dealing with fear at that point. And I said, well, I'm going to get back on the wire and see if I can work through this. A couple days later, one of my guys in my troop who's been with me my whole life literally grabs me after rehearsal and shakes me. And he goes, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I was like, "What do you mean? What's wrong with me?" Thinking that they didn't know what was going on. They can't see me. They're all in front of me or on top. And he says, "You're shaking like crazy. What is going on with you? This isn't the Nik Wallenda that we've all looked up to, that drives us to greatness. This is not the guy who we've respected." And at that point, what happened was, I had to admit that I was fearful, but at that point I was dealing with shame. The fact that here I am, the greatest wire walker of our generation, I'm fearless. And I'm not fearless. And people are realizing this and people are recognizing this. And at that point, I had to actually back up further and deal with the pride that led to shame, the pride that I was too good to be fearful, deal with the shame, and then dig down to the root of what fear actually was, and then work through that fear. It got to the point where I told my wife one evening, I said, "I'm done. I'm not getting back on the wire ever again. I'm done." And I remember that conversation like it was right now. And my wife looked at me. Now, mind you, my wife comes from 8 generations of circus on one side, 7 of the other. She has 2 Guinness World Records herself. She's an amazing aerialist and daredevil. And she supports me because of that. And that's how she can understand my passion for doing these things. And she looked at me and she said, "For 200 years, your family have lived by the words, never give up. The show must go on. That's the way you've lived. You do what you do all the time. You're inspiring people that nothing's impossible, and you're going to give up because of something in your head." She goes, "Nah, that's not you. You're not going to give up." And I remember sitting back feeling defeated, literally sitting back in the couch and tears rolling down my face like, I'm defeated. I changed 2 laws in 2 countries. I walked across some of the craziest places in the world without safety devices, risking my life. And this small 4-letter word, fear, is going to ruin the rest of my career and possibly my life. And I started going down this route of depression. And as I started going down that path, which many people do, I remember just sitting there, and I always reflect on my great grandfather and his book and his stories that I've been told and the videos I've watched and the tapes that I've listened to. And I thought, you know what, this isn't what my family does. I'm not going to go down this path. And my mind was deep. It was in the gutter at that point. I was in the valley. And I remember thinking, you know what? Everything my great grandfather did, he was able to overcome, and he was able to prove that the impossible was possible. And even though this feels impossible, I'm going to overcome it. And when I overcome it, I'm going to write about it. I'm going to tell the story, and I'm going to use this so other people that are dealing with fear don't have to go so down deep into that valley like I did, and don't have to go into that deep depression. And that's when I set off on this journey of going, and really it was about stepping out and going, okay, how were you raised? What were you taught? And what are you doing differently now? And it really came down to the power of the mind and where I allowed my mind to go, and controlling those thoughts and drowning out that negativity and continually focus on positive, rather than thinking you're going to fall while you're holding this pyramid. I would think you've held it more than anyone in the world successfully. Thousands of times you've held this pyramid. One accident, and you're going to focus on the one, not the thousands. And I started just telling myself that and working through this process. And again, with the help of psychologists and psychiatrists and spending time with people that really could teach me to relearn who I was and relearn how I do and have done what I do.